Field Vision Sports presents The Matchup with Sasha Bushka.
Kyler Murray kind of looks like a little kid running from his parents when he scrambles in the pocket.
Scott Bushka.
I had to tell my daughter that today wasn't really about her first day of school. It was really about me and the launch of our company.
And Cody Alexander.
Randomly, no. As somebody who's been around football my entire life, I literally can say that I've never smelled smelling salts, nor have I ever seen anybody actually have smelling salts. I'm sure that they were used at some point.
Like, share, and subscribe.
Welcome into the matchup by Field Vision Sports. Excited to have you with us as always. Recording ahead of the Divisional Round. I'm your host, Sasha Bushka, joined by Head of Football Operations for Field Vision, Cody Alexander, and the Dan Campbell of Field Vision Sports, Scott Bushka. Fellas, how we feeling today?
Biting kneecaps.
Dude, wait, did you call me, was it Jerry Rice last week?
Yeah, Jerry Rice last week, Dan Campbell this week.
You're
on a roll.
I'm effing pumped to be Jerry Rice, and Dan Campbell is one of my favorite humans of all time. I wish I had him giving me motivational speeches in my bathroom every morning, and like making my kids, I don't know, do push-ups or pick up their room or do their homework or something.
Yeah, I had Dan Campbell chosen out a few hours ago for other reasons, but I determined right before the show started that I was going to call you the Dan Campbell of Field Vision Sports for your motivational speaking abilities and your ability to get us fired up for this pod. So,
listen, I know that my pregame speech might have indicated that I was in a bad mood, but I'm actually fired up because 2025 is going to be a huge year. Started with the playoff challenge. We're in the playoffs, and it's going to be huge. You can bleep that out, Felix. Doesn't matter. That's how I feel. So, yeah, fired up to talk football.
Get your bleep button on point there, Felix. He also, Felix thinks you're more of a Matt LaFleur than a Dan Campbell, but we'll figure that out at another time.
I don't take offense to that, but the magic, as you can tell by the Sean McVay results, the real magic is to live between Shanahan and Dan Campbell, right? You got to be a scheme nerd, and you got to be able to motivate men.
100%.
Yeah, I feel motivated every day. All right, let's dive in. We got a big show planned. We'll look back a little bit at Wildcard weekend off the top here, and then we'll start looking forward to the Divisional Round. We've got a lot of good matchups, some good games. We'll give you some picks at the end. I want to start with this, and I'll go to Cody first. There was actually quite a few impressive performances in Wildcard weekend, if you want to look at it that way, or you could just say quite a few not very competitive games. So out of those 6 games, which team that advanced put up the most impressive performance of the weekend?
I'm going to go with the Rams. I thought that them pivoting to man coverage, they basically doubled their man coverage rate. In their own way, they took what the Lions did in week 18 and they moved it and did it again to Minnesota. That's one of the things that I think is really odd about Minnesota is that if I told you were going to go have that record that they have, but you're only going to lose like 2 teams, I mean, I think that you would be, or you would just be, that would be crazy, right? Because you only lose to the Lions and the Rams. But I think what that is those 2 offenses are very, very similar, even though they're from completely different trees. Essentially, Ben Johnson and McVay have gotten to the same system, but they've done it in different ways. The Lions like to add an extra lineman, whereas McVay wants to run everything through 11 personnel, and those receivers have to block. But I think the movement offense, it gives Brian Flores a lot of problems. Check on that kind of disastrous Super Bowl for McVay back in the day when they essentially just shut out that high-powered offense. So to me, it has to be the Rams. The way that they pivoted, it looked really, really nice. They're a scary, scary team headed forward.
Yeah, the answer. I was looking at the games when you posed this question, Sasha. Like the answer has to be the Rams, and McVay is entering. He's entering Andy Reid territory of like knowing how to get his team ready to play a big game, and like being very matchup specific in terms of the way that he has his team prepared. Like both on the offensive side of the ball and what they do on defense. And he just, I think I have this right, and maybe it's after Mike McCarthy got fired, but I think he has the second most wins for an active head coach in the playoffs after Andy Reid. And he continuously shows the ability to get his team prepared to play big games. If there was a second team, because like the Rams and the Bills, great. Like, the Ravens and the Bills, great. Like, you blew out your teams, but I'm going to be impressed when you bring it at the same level next week. The Texans, we already talked about. Like, I was not impressed by Justin Herbert throwing it to them 4 times. The other place you would go if to answer this question has to be the Commanders. And it's just because the ability for a rookie quarterback to go into a hostile environment on the road against a experienced Buccaneers team. The only team that's been to the playoffs the last 5 years in the NFC is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I thought for sure they were going to win that game. They played well. Baker Mayfield had a couple bonehead play. Well, some combination of Baker Mayfield and their center had a couple bonehead plays, at the end of that game that really cost them. But Jaden McDaniel,
Daniels.
why did I just call him? Sorry, I got lost in. Is it NBA season? I got lost in the NBA and the Minnesota Timberwolves for a second. Jaden Daniels' ability to rise to the moment, to convert critical 4th downs, because you're so scared that he's going to use his legs, right? That like it forces you to do different things in coverage. It forces you to put spies on him, but then he's able to use that and leverage it to find receivers and make the throws he needs to. Like, he just continues to impress me.
Yeah, I'm glad you almost called the Timberwolves the Twins so we could get all 3 of the major North American professional sports involved here.
I didn't.
What's the Minnesota hockey team?
I didn't almost call them the Twins.
Wild.
Yeah, the Wild. It's wild that Scott called Jaden Daniels Jaden McDaniels. Okay, now we got that covered. I'll say this. I think you guys are right that the Rams is the answer. And I think we'll get to the Eagles in a second in this second question. But is there a little bit of bias, not bias, but like kind of expectations of the Rams or of the Ravens and the Bills were high enough that you just kind of look at it as they did what they're supposed to do? Whereas the Commanders, the Texans, the Rams, those other teams you mentioned, they were playing teams that were perceived as equals to them. Whereas we expected the Ravens and the Bills to just, I think they both looked pretty impressive, regardless of what you expected going in.
Well, I think the NFL is so top heavy this year. And so, yes, we kind of, and we've talked about it before on here about how Vegas sees this really as a 5-team race. Those 5 teams, obviously 2 of them didn't play, 3 of them won. The one thing, to go with Scott, that's scary about the Commanders is they figured out the run defense against the Buccaneers. I mean, they had the number 1 run defense per EPA and the success rate in Wildcard week. And so the Buccaneers, now they don't have like the greatest of run games, but it has been really good. Liam Cohen has been able to put together some really impressive things. That's the one thing that we've kind of mentioned kind of on the back half of the season is like, oh, it's not just Baker Mayfield trying to make plays, which we know as a gunslinger, he's going to turn into Brett Favre sometimes and throw 3 picks. That's what is interesting. Now, the only caveat to this is that Lattimore looked really bad against Evans. The passing defense still has not been figured out in Washington. The run defense has been there. Can they get that together? I just don't think so. That's why I think the Rams, with that front, that young front that's really coming together, that secondary that can play good at times and can kind of basically play mitigating defense on the back end, allowing that offense to really be high powered. That's why I went with them as the team to be really worried about going forward.
Yeah. Sasha, I agree with you that the Bills and Ravens essentially like did what we expected them to do. So we're not that excited about it. The only thing I would say is particularly the Ravens, like we know this is the profile of this team is that if they have a mismatch and they're better than the team, they're going to beat the hell out of them. Right. And that's what they did to Pittsburgh. I would argue that there were some things in that happened in that game that make that secondary still feel pretty shaky to me. But yeah, this is what they do. The thing we have to see from the Ravens, less so the Bills, but also the Bills is like, can you execute that same game plan with that same level of efficiency in a tight game against a team that's your equal?
Well, and to your point with the Ravens, they're outside of the Commanders, they're the only team that had a negative EPA against the pass last week. And that has been a concern all year is that secondary. You can move Kyle Hamilton back and kind of keep him there and kind of use different things. But to me, that's going to be one of those things going forward is it going to come down to a game where you're going to be able to get the pass? We know the Bills are sneaky good at receiver. Shakir does not get enough credit. He's one of the most underrated receivers in the NFL. We talked about this in the offseason last year about how he was actually one of the better and most productive receivers, but he doesn't get any love. And he's been that way this year as well. So going into that game, that's a matchup that you really want to watch.
Yeah, obviously that'll be the game of the weekend coming up. I'm glad you guys skewed to a little bit of negativity because I want to lead us in that direction. I want to go to the least impressive performance from Wildcard Weekend. Obviously, a lot of teams got blown out, but we don't need to worry about the teams that are out of the playoffs because we'll worry about them next year. So the least impressive winning performance from Wildcard Weekend, teams that are still left. I'll go to Scott first on this one.
Yeah, you called it out. I'm gonna I have to say the Eagles, right? With the caveat that this is kind of the way the Eagles wins have felt all year, but they win 22-10. I think Jalen Hurts had 39 yards passing in the first half. Like that passing offense looked choppy. You got AJ Brown. Speaking of which, like, is there any type of content that we could get AJ Brown to read on the sideline? Because apparently that book,
Scott.
apparently that book has like vaulted to New York Times bestseller.
Yeah, Cody's written books. Let's get one of Cody's books.
Let's get him reading Art of X on the sideline.
Yeah, give him that match quarters book. We'll see him reading about coverages. We'll see how that does.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to see in my picks, but they've got the Rams coming up next weekend. That Rams defense, I think it's 4 or 5 straight games where they've given up under 10 points. The Eagles defense is good. The Eagles defense is impressive, but the question is if the Eagles offense runs up against a formidable defense that's going to stop the run, can Jalen Hurts and that passing offense get going and execute when it really matters? This is what we said going into the Eagles Steelers game, right? We're like, oh, we'll see if Jalen Hurts and the Eagles can beat a really good defense. What we learned is that the Steelers aren't a really good defense.
Right.
One, right? And the Steelers defense really isn't geared to stop the run. They couldn't stop it against the Ravens, right? And they couldn't stop it against the Eagles too. So the question is, if you put them up against the defense that can stop what they're trying to do in the run game, can limit Saquon Barkley, can you put it on the shoulders of Jalen Hurts? And I'm not sure about that yet.
Yeah, I think that we'll probably be talking about that next week if they do beat the Rams. I mean, the Rams aren't the greatest run defense. In fact, they were from last week, they were the 3rd worst against the run. Obviously the passing game just kind of snuffed anything out for the Vikings. But to your point, Scott, I think you're spot on. The Eagles defense, and if you actually go back, Jackson, our stats guy who does our Dataviz stuff, if you go back to he does every week, did we really get beat that bad? It's actually the Eagles. The Eagles actually were in the negative. The Packers actually had kind of a better net success rate than the Eagles overall in that game. The Buccaneers kind of could say the same thing against the Commanders, but that has to be worrisome going forward, especially against a team that you know is going to be able to move the ball with the Rams. I really think Fangio and Flores are guys that McVay wants to beat, that they've been working on this. And I think the secret weapon, the secret sauce for McVay is he's got Sean Desai in his office every single day. Now, if you remember that name, that was the name of the Eagles defensive coordinator prior to Fangio being there. And he's important because he's been with Fangio since Chicago. And he knows that system intimately. He knows exactly what Fangio's thinking. And so to me, he runs the scout team. There was a story out, I want to say a couple days ago that talked about how McVay uses him. And so to me, I think with the Eagles going forward, that has to be a concern of theirs, is that we don't want to get to a point where our passing game doesn't work and then our defense kind of gets figured out a little bit, because again, it is a bend don't break system.
Yeah. I mean, sorry, Sasha, just like, that's the thing about a Fangio defense is it's bend don't break. It's gettable. Like he was the defensive coordinator for the Broncos, and then he's the head coach of the Broncos for several years. And what is that if you have a good quarterback that can be efficient underneath, right? There's 5, 6, 7 yard gains in the passing game that you can execute on consistently. And to me, like McVay and Stafford profile, McVay and Stafford with Tyler Higbee, if he's healthy, Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp, profiles the type of team that can be efficient and scheme to move the ball on a Vic Fangio defense. So like, I feel like that game, and we'll get to it in my picks, but I feel like that game is going to be tight late, and the Rams are going to make Jalen Hurts throw the ball.
Yeah, and I think this is something, okay, so going back last year, the Chiefs were very much a zone-heavy system until they got to the playoffs. And then they straight up just blanked everybody with man coverage, and people just didn't trust it. The Rams kind of fit that mold. Heavy coverage disguise. If they can manufacture what they did against the Vikings, I think 30% is probably tops. I don't think they want to go over that because then it creates too many one-on-ones. But I think if they can do that and they can manufacture that going forward, they were able to shut down Jefferson, and they were able to if they can shut down Jefferson and Addison, they probably have to feel like they can do the same thing to the Eagles with a lesser, with kind of a lesser, with a little bit better of a run game. So a lesser passing game, a little bit better of a run game. Maybe they feel like they can do that. So this is, to me, if I'm an Eagles fan, I'm with the performance that we saw, I'm scared. If I'm the rest of the NFC, that's a team I don't want to see, because we already watched with the Lions and the Rams earlier this year. It was basically a shootout. So to me, I don't think you want to play the Rams right now.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and add Felix Johnson to the stage as well. Yeah, Felix wasn't expecting that. The one thing about the playoffs is you always kind of want to look forward and keep it moving forward, because teams are gone. You don't worry about them until next year. So you guys are already starting to kind of roll that direction with analysis about the Rams and the Eagles. So I first of all, hello, Felix.
Hi, Sasha. How are you doing?
I'm good. Glad to have you.
Scott, Cody.
What's up? Love the hat.
Felix,
Thanks.
great to have you. Also love that.
I want to roll into our looking forward with a question, and I think Scott and Cody already kind of played their hand on this, so I'll start with Felix. Of the dark horses, and like Cody alluded to it earlier, it's Vegas says it's a 5-team race, and Vegas is probably right. That's Ravens, Bills, Eagles, Lions, Chiefs. But of the Commanders, Rams, Texans, we'll call them the dark horse 3. Who has the best chance to make noise or make it to the Super Bowl?
Well, I think it's pretty interesting. Those 3 teams, they all have a quarterback that we trust in. Like Jaden Daniels this year has 5 game-winning drives. That's pretty impressive. I think Dak Prescott has 5 in his entire career. Matthew Stafford has won a Super Bowl, and Sean McVay, we just sang all their praises and all that good stuff. And even C.J. Stroud with the sophomore slump. I mean, it was the Chargers, and they got the ball however many times through interceptions, but he made some plays that they absolutely needed, had a couple of first downs that they needed to get. in certain spots. And I think we forget the Texans are a team that has beaten the Bills this year. So they do have a little bit of cachet attached to them. They won their division. I know that CJ Stroud wasn't what he was last year, but with all that being said, I think the strongest of all those candidates probably is the Rams because they have the best quarterback. And I probably would say the best quarterback. I probably meant to say the best coach, without a doubt. But and then even just schematically, all those different things that we talked about, and the kind of want to kind of what Scott was saying earlier. He wants to beat Fangio after some of the things that they've run into over the last few years. I think there's a little bit of animosity between the Rams and the Lions going into the next round too. So there's a lot of factors working in their favor in Los Angeles.
Yeah, I think like one thing you have to look at too is just the path of the big five. The Eagles might be the most vulnerable. The playoff odds don't say it right now, but that's because the Bills and Ravens play each other. So once they get past each other, they might jump up as higher in the odds. But the Texans play the Chiefs and the Commanders play the Lions. I think that's like from a playoff perspective, those are tougher matchups than playing the Eagles. So the Rams have the best chance to be in a conference championship game.
I will just say the Texans are scary because of that defense. The defense is so good, and I don't think people understand on that on the last quarter of this season. They've been one of the better defenses. I know that the caveat here and the asterisk is going to be it was the Chargers, but the way that they are able to kind of play man coverage, I think, can give some problems to the Chiefs that other teams can't. Now, again, the counterpoint to that is, what's the offense going to look like for the Texans? We know the Chiefs are one of they're just an efficient machine. They just chug forward. They don't make mistakes and they end up winning. The Texans are going to have to play lights out. Their three stars are going to have to basically have career performances for them to win. But the defense to me is the one that's scary and could give some problems to the Chiefs.
Yeah, I I heard a really interesting stat from this past weekend. Of the 12 quarterbacks that played, the 3 quarterbacks who faced the highest pressure rate, Justin Herbert, Sam Darnold, and Matt Stafford. Now, 2 of those performances went like you would thought they have gone with a high pressure rate. Stafford went the opposite, right? And to me, what does that tell you? Like, Stafford's a really experienced quarterback who knows exactly what to do when he's pressured and has thought through like what his outlets are. And the reason I'm bringing that up is it's cool that the Texans can pressure the quarterback, right?
Right.
Patrick Mahomes, when pressured, is not Justin Herbert when pressured, right? And so like they're undoubtedly going to get pressure on Patrick Mahomes. The Chiefs know that. They're prepared for that. And there's actually no other coach that is better at scheming around the weaknesses of his team and the strengths of the other team than Andy Reid, right? So he has done it for years against Nick Bosa. He's done it for years against elite pass rushers. He just uses it to their advantage, right? So you would expect the Chiefs to get the ball out quick. You would expect them to have some hot reads. And like, I don't have a lot of worry that Andy Reid and Mahomes are very well prepared for the fact that the Texans have a good pass rush.
And not just that, but where do most of Patrick Mahomes' iconic runs come from? It's in the playoffs, and he's been rested for a month now. So he's gotten a full rest, and he's ready to go. And I think even with that pressure, he has his escapability that he's going to lean on even more at this time of year.
Yeah. And if you look to the other side of the ball, and Steve Spagnuolo, the Chiefs are known kind of on both sides of the ball for kind of holding some things back for the playoffs. But I think this year is really interesting because they won all those close games early in the year, started 9-0 or whatever it was before they lost to the Bills. And because of that, they never really got pushed in the standings at all. Like, they had it wrapped up by Christmas, but even then, like, even if they would have lost one of those 3 games in 10 days, they probably would have ended up being the number 1 seed. And so the question is like, what does Spag show? What does Andy Reid show on the offensive side that they haven't put on tape this year? And they're they're really great at executing in those situations.
Yeah, and I mean, what's interesting is that these teams saw each other. What was it, 5 days before Christmas? So they just played each other. I actually think the Chiefs probably, because if we go back to that moment, Chiefs needed to win those two games against the Texans and the Steelers to, so I think they probably, that was the moment where you started to see the Chiefs get into playoff game planning a little bit more. But they've also had 23 days to figure out what they're going to do next. If we go back quickly to where we started this conversation, which was on the Rams, because I think we all see the Rams as the most dangerous of those three, the three non-favorites. Cody, you said something interesting about the Rams. You were somewhat comparing the Rams defense to the Chiefs in terms of the way they've been changing scheme. This Rams defense reminds me a little bit of the 2022 Chiefs team, because you had a defense that was super young. They hit on a ton of draft picks, and then we got to they struggled, and then you got to the playoffs, and you're like, holy shit, like McDuffie's good. Right.
Well, and the Chiefs spent all their draft picks in the secondary. The Rams just spent it on defensive line.
Yeah. And my point is, like, I think it's a really young defense that you can see getting better before your eyes. And I think we all, like, against the game against the Vikings, we're like, holy shit, like, this defense is good. That's because they're young, right? And so, like, you can see them continuing to improve and being a better defense than they were throughout the regular season.
Yeah, and what I think is interesting about them too is, even if you go and you look at how they attacked Minnesota, they basically said, you will not pass on us, and we are going to put the ball in Darnold's hand. He's going to have to make decisions. If you want to run the ball, we know you're not going to beat us running the ball. And so when I look at that and I see, okay, what could be coming against the Eagles, one of the things that you could see from them is saying, hey, we're just going to play base. We're going to line up. And in fact, the Rams have played some of the lowest amounts of nickel in the NFL. They play, if you go back and you look at it, they actually are the least team, and it's by almost 20 percentage points. Every team other than the Rams is over 50% in nickel usage. The Rams ended the season playing 36% base, 36% nickel, and 25% dime. What they did against the Vikings is they said, we're actually going to play nothing but dime. They played 44% dime. They played 42% nickel, and they didn't play any base. What I think that tells you is that they sold out for the pass. So if you're playing the Eagles, what are you going to do? You're going to sell out for the run. This is a big base, and then maybe they do some different things to where they think that they can do it. But they've shown now, just like Spags has done in the past, is like, look, we'll go completely week by week, and we are going to run what is going to win us. And so I agree with you. This gives me Chiefs vibes from 2022.
Yeah, they're breaking Cameron's tendency model.
Yeah.
I want to ask this question while we still have Felix before we go to break, because it's just something that dawned on me. And Felix is our resident power ranker, so I think he's the right guy to have on here for this. As we look at these matchups this weekend, I'm really pumped up because, to me, I feel like we have, if not the 8 best teams in the league, at least the 8 teams that are playing the best right now. Would you agree with that statement, Felix, that like these, if you were making a power rankings right now, this would be 1 through 8?
Probably. I mean, they're over in the AFC. We had this conversation a handful of times over the last few weeks, but just look at the quarterbacks: Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, and CJ Stroud. These are probably the 4 best quarterbacks in the conference. And then over in the NFC, you have, like you said, the 4 best coaches. Or we'll see how you feel about Dan Quinn compared to Kevin O'Connell or something like that. But still, it is the best of the best. And like in the playoffs, it matters who your coach is and who your quarterback is. And we have the 16 best-ish of all of those combinations.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, I think everyone's digesting what happened to the Vikings, but Vikings were a top 5 team all year. You can kind of throw that. You can kind of throw the Packers in there as well, although I feel like
I'd argue just with the Vikings, they're kind of like what happened to the Packers, where they're the only teams that they didn't beat were the ones that they ended up losing to when it mattered the most, the Lions and the Rams. And so kind of like the Packers, they lost to the Lions and the Vikings all season long, but it's just those are the teams that ended up beating them.
I don't want to poo-poo on the Vikings because they had a great year. They went 14-3.
Right.
You can't deny that. It was the second best record in the NFC. So they had a great year. I will say this. The schedule broke really well for the Vikings this year in terms of getting off to a hot start. And then, like, I remember we were on this pod when they were after their first 6 games, and it was like, they might not lose again until they play the Lions in week 18. So if you can look that far ahead and see that, then that's just the schedule broke really well for them, and they took advantage of it. They won all the games. A lot of you can lose to any team in the NFL. So I'll give credit where credit's due. And like Cody said, they only lost to 2 teams all year long. They beat the Packers twice. So the Vikings had a great season. But just looking at their last 2 games in terms of how teams are playing right at this moment, I don't know that they would crack that top 8.
Right. I think if they were more like an 11-win team going into the playoffs, we'd view them a little bit more accurately than what they were, where they only lost to the Lions and the Rams were going to scheme them up perfectly to beat them the way they did.
Well, and I think, too, this was pretty predictable. I think we all agreed that the Rams were going to win. I think we all had them covering. It was like +1, so which means we admitted we thought the Rams were going to win. They regressed on defense again this year because as you go further in, you are what you repeatedly do. You could see, okay, we're going to get heavy pressure. We're going to run a lot of zone. Flores tried to flip that and run man, so it confused some people right there. Kudos to him. But when you get into the playoffs and you play a team like the Rams, he went off the wall crazy aggressive. I think we had it at 50% cover 0, meaning that your seams are essentially just open. And one of the teams that will run snag, which is basically just a little hitch and a flat push all day long, is going to be the Rams. And the perfect play for this is the no-name tight end that scored a touchdown. If you remember the play, everybody's on Jefferson, I think. So everybody just goes to Jefferson. The corner who's supposed to be playing in the low area for that snag goes and tries to knock Jefferson. It gives enough space. Stafford sees it, throws it right to the seam. They know there's nobody in the middle of the field. He just heads to the middle of the field for a touchdown. And to me, that simple play illustrates why there was no adjustment in this other than to just be more aggressive. And as a defensive guy, that's typically not the way you want to go, especially when you have a quarterback like Stafford who can get it out pretty quickly.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about this every week, but it's so obvious that you can't, if you're a coaching staff that can't adjust, you will lose. And if you're a quarterback where things have to be perfect, you will lose. Right? So the team, the teams that are left have quarterbacks that can operate in different situations. And if you blitz them, they're going to adjust. And coaches that are going to adjust their scheme based on the team that they're playing. Like Brian Flores putting that amount of pressure on Matt Stafford and Sean McVay, it's just like, you knew what was going to happen. Why didn't you adjust?
Yeah. It's definitely like coach quarterback comes to play in the playoffs, and it becomes more important than ever. I'm nothing if I'm not transparent and honest with the people. I will say one of my picks last week was the Vikings. So not everybody picked the Rams. I apologize to everyone.
One of us has them in the Super Bowl. So
I'll never make that mistake again. Last question before we take a quick break and go over the games in detail for this upcoming week. Of the Big Five, the Eagles, the Ravens, the Bills, the Lions, and the Chiefs, who's the most vulnerable right now? And I'll go to Cody first on this.
Yeah, to me, I really think of the Big Five, it's got to be the Eagles. There's big question marks around that passing game. Hurts as a quarterback, and somebody that's going to have to just prove that you can go out when they take Saquon out are you going to be able to get the ball to the players, and are you going to be able to push the ball down the field? I think to me, it's got to be the Eagles.
Do we have concurrence?
Yep, agree.
No. I think it's you can say it's either Buffalo or Baltimore, being that they have to play each other, but I'll probably say Baltimore just for a one-word answer. Because of Lamar Jackson he's had his issues in the playoffs. They have to go to Buffalo. They did beat them 35-10 this year. But it was a desperate Ravens team. They were 1-2 at the time, and if they go 1-3, who knows what the situation looks like. So I'd say Baltimore headed to Buffalo. I know that they're the favorite, but that's silly.
I feel like that was a lot more than one word.
Well,
what was the one
Baltimore,
word? What was the one word answer?
Jesus, I'm done. You don't need me anymore.
This gets as many words as he wants.
No, he just said it's a one-word answer, and then he said a lot of words.
He's
So
saying instead of
team
making
answer.
it the Bills
A
or
one-team
Baltimore.
answer.
One team.
Oh, okay. No, he said one word. Go back and check the tape. Be
I'll
watching
cut
the
it
tape
out.
like
I'll cut
Cody.
this whole
Like
thing out. So it never
Cody's gonna be cranking defensive tape. I'm gonna be cranking matchup podcast tape.
Sounds good. Let's take a quick break. On the other side, we'll go over the best offensive and defensive teams left, break down each game, and give you our picks. You're listening to the Matchup by Field Vision Sports. Stay with us.
You know I love you, Felix.
Welcome back into the Matchup by Field Vision Sports. Excited to have you with us for the second half of the show today. We got into some games that are coming up more than others. I want to start with some macro stuff, and then we'll get into each game. On the offensive side, and I think there's a couple of good candidates for this. It's not really super cut and dry. And I'll start with Cody here. Who is the best offensive football team left in the playoffs?
I think it's got to be I would say the Ravens. With the only thing that worries me is the health of Zay Flowers. But when you have Lamar and you have Derrick Henry in the backfield, that's just one of those things that they can pretty much overcome anything. So to me, it would probably be them.
Okay. Scott, you may want to do this anyways, but you can make the case for the Lions for me?
I was going to make the case for the Lions. I mean, the only thing I will say about the Ravens is they have such unique offensive weapons with the way that Lamar and Derrick pair together in the running game that it's like they have a unique aspect to their offense that even Detroit can't replicate. But when you want to go to the play caller and Ben Johnson and the sheer like plethora of weapons that Jared Goff has in Amon-Ra St. Brown, Sam Laporta, Jahmyr Gibbs, I think David Montgomery's coming back, and Jameson Williams, who like quietly, most people think he's like a speed guy. Either he's going to catch one over the top or like you get him moving forward in space and he's going to take it to the house. If you've watched him the last several weeks, he actually makes a lot of like 3rd and 8 over the middle, getting hammered in the back and hanging on to it catches. So their weapons partnered with what Ben Johnson does and the way that their offensive line like both runs the ball and protects Jared Goff. Like I can make the argument that and that is the team that's had to do the most carrying of their defense, right? And like, okay, you want me to score 45 points to win? We can do it. So in some ways, they feel the most inevitable, if you will.
I like that. That's a good way to put it. The Lions are going to get their points every single week. The Ravens, they are too, but if you can find a way to stop the run and make them beat you passing, there is the potential, at least the possibility of a bad game in there for the Ravens.
Yeah.
So
hey, just one other
comes down to those two.
Just one other thing on that, which I didn't mention, but it's absolutely something you have to think about when you're thinking about the Lions and when you're playing the Lions. Dan Campbell is such a maniac on 4th down, and it makes for good. It makes for good like podcast fodder, but it also just from a math standpoint means that they have 4 downs to convert almost all the time, right? And so you've got an incredibly efficient offense, and their coach gives them 4 downs all the time, right? And more often than not, they convert that, which gives them, like, even if you think back to that, the game when they played the Vikings, it's like, if they didn't go for it on 4th down all the time, there would have been tons of times that the Vikings stopped them. But they did go for it on 4th down, and they scored all the time. So that's maybe, and I did actually read Felix's article, like, maybe that comes back to haunt them. But up to this point, it's been a massive advantage.
Yeah, it's basically like if they get the first down, then they have 4 downs the rest of the way. Because by then you're close enough to midfield, he's going to go for it every time, unless you get yourself into like a 4th and 10. So,
yeah, and to your point, it changes the way that you have to call defense. So it's essentially and the reason why like 1A and 1B are the Ravens and the Lions is I think of it as like the way that you do this is like playing a flex bone team, like playing the option, like at the high school level, or if you're playing like one of the academies, like you have to completely change what you do. So like philosophy, I have to change completely everything. How are we going to stop this? How are we going to stop that? So you start thinking about that. With the Lions, yeah, they run quote unquote traditional offenses, but it's a motion offense. They'll bring in an extra lineman. How are you going to contend with that? How are you going to, cut different things off? But then you have to then plan. They get 2 first downs. Yeah. They don't get a very good one on first. Well, if they get that, so your game plan has to be possession in 10. How are we going to do that? What are their coming out plays? And then if they get that first down, now I have to bump everything up. First and second down, I have to lump together when I call it. Now third, depending on what the third down is, I have to really be third and medium now becomes a second down play, right? Yeah. Third and short is a second down play. And to me, that changes. That's hard for a defensive coach. We know this. Defensive coaches tend to be really rigid. So changing that and not regressing to what we saw with Flores, which is just go, okay, fine, face melter defense 5,000. That's what's really hard about it.
If you just look at third down alone, you can't just play the sticks, because if they get close, they're going to go for it. And it brings running into play on way more distances. Yep. Like, it's got to be, for most teams, if you know you're going to punt on the next play, it's got to be less than 2 yards to even consider running it. With the Lions, if it's 3rd and 5, they might run the ball if they know they're going for it on the next play. So it brings a lot more things into play for the defensive coordinator.
I mean, if you think about it, because I was where my mind went to is, you know what, the Bills are kind of like this too. And then I was like, oh, the Ravens are kind of like this too. And then I was like, the Eagles are kind of like this too. Like Ravens, Bills, Eagles, Lions, they're all very aggressive on 4th down, and they all have run games where they can go for it, that's a reason where you would say the Chiefs are way more traditional and conservative.
Yeah, ironically,
in this arena, and it's a disadvantage for them relative to the other big 5.
Offensively, it's a disadvantage, but that leads us into our next question. Because like, I think Andy Reid's been coaching for a long time, and he's trying to set his defense up for success. And maybe that's just a philosophy that he's carried over, because the offense used to be way better than the defense, and maybe he should be a little bit more aggressive offensively to give them more opportunities, but he's just not. So that leads me into the next question. Who's the best defensive team left?
Look, I think if Jalen Petrie was playing, you have to give it to the Texans, but he's not. So they're missing a critical piece at the nickel. I still think that they have one of the best, if not, I mean, we're pushing it there. I think it's the Eagles. That the defense is exactly what Fangio wants. If you go and you watch what they did with the Packers, they did a lot of different things, moving guys around, really tried to challenge that gun run offense, took everything away, made Love essentially have to throw into what looks like open windows. And then all of a sudden there's a defender there in the way that they match up in their zone. I think this is it to me, is the perfect coach with the perfect scheme, with the perfect players. And when you look at it that way, I think the Eagles still have the best defense in the playoffs right now.
Yeah, I certainly a case to be made for the Eagles. I think it's the Chiefs. And I think it's the Chiefs because of the defensive coordinator you mentioned, Spags. And the one flip side to all of those 4 offenses, the Lions, the Eagles, the Ravens, the Bills, and their willingness to go for it on 4th and 2 is Kansas City probably has the one defensive coordinator of all those where you feel really, really pretty good about Spagnuolo doing something unique and dialing up something to disrupt a play on 4th and 2. And you know, you don't have to look much farther than the Super Bowl against the 49ers, right? Where there were a couple 3rd and shorts, one at the end of regulation and one at that 3rd and 3 or 4 close to the goal line, where all San Francisco had to do was convert one of those and the game's over. And they couldn't do it because Spags dialed up the pressures that he dialed up. So I go the Chiefs just because they have probably the most unique defensive play caller.
Yeah, it's a good call out from a personnel standpoint. Like Cody said, I think the Eagles, the Eagles have always had good personnel at all, like offense and defense. Howie Roseman is a killer GM, and they just this year with Fangio and with Kellen Moore, they've put it together more than they could last year at the coordinator spots to get the most out of that talent. So I still think there's no doubt Fangio is a great coordinator. When it comes to playoff coordinating, I agree with you, Scott, that Spagnuolo, he's won 4 Super Bowls as a coordinator for a reason. And so when it comes to playoff coordinating and big game coordinating, I'd take Spags as my guy on that. But the Eagles probably do have overall better talent. Let's dive into the games. We've talked about some of these games quite a bit already and some not as much. So we'll start in the order that they're going off, the Chiefs-Texans. This is a game we've explored a little bit. So we'll go quickly on it and then get into some of the other games. But Cody, do you see you've talked ad nauseum about the Texans defense and the way it's looked recently, and it's played really well. And the Chiefs, we just said, maybe have the best defense left in the playoffs. Do you see this as being a low-scoring affair?
I think it's going to be a low-scoring affair. I also don't like an 8.5 spread. They're essentially saying that they don't. Vegas is saying that they don't believe in Stroud. I think we've seen it and we've talked. Man, I don't know how many times. I mean, every week, Chiefs are going to get in a 1-score game. If they're going to blow somebody out, it's going to probably be because of turnovers. The one thing that scares me a little bit with the Chiefs is their secondary play. The corners just have not been, especially opposite McDuffie. Now, McDuffie has had points where he's played really, really well. But the corner opposite him has not necessarily always been great. So are there ways that they can get Nico Collins kind of isolated away from McDuffie? I think those are things that you have areas of concern. The run defense is going to be there. The Texas offensive line isn't great. So I'm not really worried about them, them holding up against the offensive line of the Texans. I think the defensive line is a workhorse defensive line. They actually produce a little bit more than you would think so. But I do think it's going to just be a low scoring game because I don't think that they're going to have a lot of air. I think the Texans are going to just say, hey, look, we want you to beat us on the ground. Pacheco's going to have to beat us, not Mahomes. We're going to take away your receivers. We're going to try and play really tight coverage to them. And if it works, then it's going to be low scoring. If it doesn't, then this could be one of those possibilities where we see the 8.5 point spread. I just don't see it that way.
Let me follow up with this for Scott. Cody's indicating that he thinks that the Chiefs will need to win with the run game. If the Texans do play it that way and try to force the Chiefs into winning with the run game, will Andy Reid be committed enough to the run to make that a reality?
I mean, the short answer is probably not. And I think this is a worse run game with less willingness to commit to the run than, say, the Chiefs were last year. I really do, and Andy Reid has a history of that. That being said, I think he has a different set of playmakers that he feels really comfortable getting short passes in space and using short passes a little bit more in the run game. So I mean, to me, what's going to be Chiefs get Jalen Watson back. So in theory, that should help a lot at their defense in that second cornerback spot. And I can't for the life of me figure out how the Chargers decided, like, we're just going to let Nico Collins beat us. Like, I don't think Spagnuolo and the Chiefs will make that mistake, and they just have a better top tier elite quarterback and cornerback in Trent McDuffie. To me, what's interesting when the Chiefs are on this side of the ball, one is they have some decisions to make at left tackle, which if they screw up, right, could bring their offense to, I don't want to say to a halt, but could cause a lot of problems for the Chiefs. Like they either start DJ Humphries and move Tooney back inside, or they do what they've been doing. So that'll be interesting to watch. The other thing that I don't think people are probably talking about enough with the Chiefs is Hollywood Brown back, I think, makes a big difference. So when you couple Hollywood Brown with Xavier Worthy clearly maturing in his first year and becoming more of a complete route runner and someone they feel comfortable with, doing jet sweeps and throwing short passes to, you put those two guys with playoff Travis Kelce and DeAndre Hopkins, and I think that the Chiefs have more offensive options than last year for sure, and then what we're probably giving them credit for. They played all those one-score games. Hollywood Brown was back for 2, and the Texans and Steelers games weren't particularly close, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, I do think I am really interested to see what that offense looks like with some rest, some game planning, and a full complement of weapons.
Yeah. And I don't want to spend much more time on it, but it is a really unique, interesting scenario that you have the number 1 seed, 8.5-point divisional round favorites, and they don't know who they're going to start at left tackle a few days out from the game. Like that's interesting. But my gut is Tooney's been doing the job out there. You let Mike Rimmers play guard, and Tooney starts left tackle.
Mike Rimmers hasn't played guard since the
Tampa
Bay Buccaneers.
Who's their backup? Who's their backup guard that comes in for Tooney? I got the name wrong.
Caliendo.
Not
the comedian Frank Caliendo, but Mike Caliendo, I believe.
Okay. This is a good, yeah. I knew there was about a 60-40 chance that I was going to get that wrong when I said it, and I said it anyways. Let's move on to the second game on Saturday, Lions and Commanders. The Chiefs-Texans game is a 41.5-point over-under. This one is 56.5. At last check, maybe has just gone down to 55.5. So expecting a shootout here between these two teams. I'll start on the Lions offensive side, Commanders defensive side. What can the Commanders do, Cody, to slow down this Lions offense?
Stop the run, I guess. Make Goff actually have to do drop back pass. I think this is just a bad matchup. I mean, I actually don't mind the 9. This is the one that I don't mind, the 9.5 spread. I don't know what the Commanders are going to be able to do. The Lions, if you want to go ahead and play man coverage, do it at your own risk. So locking Lattimore on somebody, Lattimore doesn't really play in the slot. So, and he didn't really have a great day against Evans. I still think he's kind of bugged by that hamstring. So what are you going to do to mitigate that? They still got to figure out corner. Sanders still has been playing really good outside. Still, I think he's out of position. I think he needs to be playing in the nickel. I just don't, unless they can manufacture some pressures. I just don't know how they're going to be able to win. This Lions offense is just too powerful. It's got too many answers to what the Commanders are going to be able to throw at it.
Hey, Cody, I agree with you on that side of the ball. Question for you, which I feel like this Lions defense is hard to peg in general, just given all of the injuries they've had, etc. What's your take on this Lions defense against a mobile quarterback like Jaden Daniels?
Well, I actually wrote about the Lions defense this week on Match Quarters. That was my article out on Monday. And the title was, "Is the Lions defense back?" And one of the things that we saw at the beginning of the year, one of the things in the offseason was moving Brian Branch back into safety. Who's going to play nickel? Well, they had a lot of linebackers. They had Barnes, who moves around, plays kind of that hybrid edge. They can get into different looks. And then you obviously have Branch, who can move down to the slot as a safety and play the down safety position. And so everything was fine. They were playing relatively well at the beginning of the year. The offense was struggling, right? If you remember, then the injuries start piling up until we get to the point, week 16, they move Branch full-time back to nickel. They actually raise their nickel usage up, I want to say like 5 to 6%. Amick Robertson moves out. Do you know who the best outside corner has been the last 3 weeks of the season? It's been Amick Robertson. He's on our all threat team. I know Sasha knows because he does the all threat team and all havoc team. So him moving out, Branch moving in, it's actually been able to loosen the lighten the load on Anzalone and Campbell, who now are really your only linebackers you have. So to me, this defense is the wild card, which I think is hilarious because we all agree that the Lions are probably the number one team right now. But if this figures out and Glenn can now play man coverage the way that he wants to, and they can do some different things to kind of pressure up front, this is a scary team. This is a team that we're looking, if you remember back in our childhood when we used to have Super Bowls where it was like 50-17 and stuff like that, this is the team that literally could go out and just hang 40 on everybody. And if the defense plays well, then I mean, you force everybody to pass, which is now a strength of theirs. Terrion Arnold's played unbelievable this year. Kirby Joseph and Brian Branch are basically outside of Chicago, probably have the two best safeties in the league that are playing together this year. So this is a scary team, especially if we look at that last 3 weeks. They've kind of figured things out on defense. That everybody else in the rest of the NFL should be hitting the pause button on that.
Yeah. It's a good call out. And I just want to point out that Felix did not endure the blowout Super Bowls of the youth as the rest of the three of us did, because he's young enough. He's been blessed with good close Super Bowls most of the time.
Right.
Yeah.
There was a point in time they were not.
He also clearly has some pent up anger
towards
Mike Rimmers.
I will give a shout out about Mike Rimmers, born in Portland, Oregon.
Mike Rimmers of a Jesuit high school in Portland, Oregon, went to school with my in-laws. So you better watch your mouth, Felix.
I'm so glad he's not on stage right now. Felix picks out at least one offensive lineman a year on the Chiefs that he can't stand. So Mike Rimmers must have been that guy from a few years ago.
But that's also an indication that like he's so upset about the Super Bowl that the Chiefs lost. He clearly doesn't remember us being in our living room and watching Lynn Elliott miss field goals and Marty Schottenheimer blow first round playoff games and the Chiefs just generally sucking for the first 30 years of life.
Good old Elvis Gerback.
All right, let's move on to the Eagles-Rams game. I'll start with Scott on this one. The Eagles are going to have to play better on offense, I think, to beat the Rams than they did against the Packers. Jalen Hurts missed the last week of the season, concussion protocol, all that. Maybe a little rust last week. Do you think they get their passing game to a better spot, to a point where Jalen Hurts is playing more confidently and they can beat the Rams in this one?
Can they get it there, and do they have a chance to beat the Rams? Of course. Do I have confidence that they will, and that Jalen Hurts can turn into like a super efficient passer out of thin air? He actually's never done it in the playoffs. If we're being like, if you were to, I don't have them in front of me, but if you go back even in that 2022 run and you look at the Eagles wins in that postseason, Jalen Hurts is passing for like 140 yards, 150 yards.
With the exception of the one loss they had in the Super Bowl, he played really well.
He played really well, and the Chiefs forced him to play well. You're right about that. I mean, we already talked about it, so I don't want to belabor it too much, but I don't love this matchup for the Eagles. Like, I think the Rams are an ascending defense. I think they can try to force Jalen Hurts to pass. And look, he's got world-class receivers, so they're probably going to get some stuff. But give me another team that's considered among the Super Bowl favorites where you don't really trust the quarterback and you think the coach is a wild card, right? So, I don't know. I will not be shocked. I'll give it away. I'm picking the Rams to cover the 6, and I won't be shocked if they go in there and beat Philadelphia.
It's a wild world we live in. That, like, if you would have looked at this a couple of years ago, we trust Jared Goff more than Jalen Hurts. which rightfully so. I'm not saying it's wrong, but like if you would have looked at this like when the trade happened, obviously Jalen Hurts hadn't ascended yet, but like Jared Goff was considered a throw-in in that trade. And then you're talking about a coach that's more of a wild card than Dan Campbell. So it's just interesting. I know we're gonna get to picks here in a second, so I kind of know who Scott likes in this game, at least against the spread. Cody, there's been a lot of negativity towards the Eagles on this pod, but they're still probably going to beat the Rams, right?
If they do, it's going to be because of defense, and it's going to be because Fangio is able to do a few things differently, kind of set Sean McVay up. This is the chess match. I think to me, this is the one. I understand why they put the Ravens Bills as the last game to be played. It is the tightest one. In fact, it's the closest spread. It's probably got the two marquee quarterbacks in it. But to me, this is the game. This is what you want to see. I mean, I thought what McVay put a masterclass on this past weekend. I thought the defense played really well. You're going to go up against an obviously much better offensive line. And that's kind of the thing about the Rams that's a little worrisome is like they're kind of front runners on that front line. Is that if it's a bad defense, if it's a bad offensive line, they're going to look awesome. But against good offensive lines, I mean, there's been games where they haven't really performed that well. This is probably the best offensive line in the NFL. I think that all Hurts has to do is manage the game. I don't think Hurts needs to be a hero. And if Hurts doesn't try and be a hero, they minimize turnovers, they control the ball. This is a game that they could easily win.
Yeah.
And especially with Fangio on defense, he plays a scheme that should give the Rams a little bit more difficulty than what the Vikings did.
I think you hit the nail on the head with one thing, which is Hurts and the turnovers. The reason the Eagles played so well this year and won so many games in a row is because Hurts figured out how to stop fumbling and throwing interceptions and had a long streak of turnoverless games. And they're enough better than everyone else. As long as they don't give up the atomic bomb, they're probably going to win. What Hurts needs to avoid in this game is like the Jared versus 50-yard fumble 6 that we saw against the Vikings, because that's the kind of play that tilts the game. And now all of a sudden you don't have game control and the Rams are playing on their terms.
Right.
But he also doesn't. That's 100% true about Hurts, but he also doesn't take chances. He holds on to the ball too long. There's reads, first and second reads that he should be throwing that he just doesn't throw because he's almost like so cautious at this point in time that he doesn't operate the way a highly functioning quarterback should operate and move through his reads.
That's good enough to win them a lot of games in the regular season, but it might not be good enough for them to win these playoff games. So last game, and I know we're a little over here, but this is the game of the week, the most important game, so I don't want to skimp on it. Not most important game, but the game that most people are looking forward to. Ravens and Bills in Buffalo. The Ravens are actually 1-point favorites at last check. You've got the two leading candidates for MVP in Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson, the two quarterbacks that have played the best all year, the 2 and 3 seed in the AFC. It should be a classic. I'll lead off the conversation with this, and I'll go to Cody. In this one particular game, who would you rather have playing quarterback for you, Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson?
Man,
I don't think this question's that hard. Just to be honest.
Look, I like Lamar, and I want Lamar. I want Lamar to win, and I want him to win because I think it's unfair for people to be throwing him in a situation where people don't believe that he's an elite quarterback or that he folds and a lot of the stuff. Look, this is the year. This is the year that you can't make any other excuses. Now you can make excuses about kind of his receiving core, but Zay Flowers is a 1,000-yard receiver. Rashad Bateman's the first round draft pick. He's got two really good tight ends. He's got a great traditional Y, and he's got a great flex tight end in Likely. So the run game's there. Derrick Henry's there. This is it. This has to be the year. And I think that, to me, if I have to choose the two, I want to go with Lamar. I think Lamar has a little bit more answers than Josh Allen.
I didn't, Sasha. Not that I don't think it was a hard answer, but I and this is no disrespect to Lamar, but my answer would have been Josh Allen. And it's for the sole reason that I trust him with his arm more. He is he's a different type of runner. And what I mean by that is like he's a more unstoppable force on, as we saw against the Chiefs, on 4th and 2 when you just have to have 2 yards, where he's gonna get it. And there's still the scenario where if you get enough guys around, like you can get Lamar down. And the other thing is just we've seen Allen in these situations go blow for blow with a quarterback like Mahomes a couple times, actually. Like Allen has lost to Mahomes several times in the playoffs, but every time he did it, those games were back and forth, right? And it's like blow for blow, haymaker for haymaker. You wouldn't have left either of them and been like Josh Allen left anything on the bone, which we can't yet say for Lamar. Like I feel bad about saying that, but we can't yet say the same thing about Lamar. So that if the question was, who do you trust more? I still say Josh Allen until we see differently on Sunday. I'm so freaking fired up for this game.
I think
It's
within
gonna be
the
awesome.
within the context of the regular flow of the game, like the Ravens offense is better. Lamar Jackson may even make more big plays, and like he's more explosive than Josh Allen. But Scott alluded to it, but like in the gotta have it moments, the 4th down moments or 3rd and long where you're gonna punt if you don't pick it up or at least get close to picking it up. Like Josh Allen just seems to make those plays time after time. And it's not that Lamar can't get there. I've just seen it more times from Josh Allen than Lamar. And I can see in like the way Cody answered that he's rooting for Lamar. And I think a lot of people share that sentiment, is like he's gotten this tag as like a non-playoff performer, and he's one of the best quarterbacks of his generation. And like it sucks to get that tag. Peyton Manning had it for a while, and honestly, like maybe still has it a little bit to this day. And so I think a lot of people feel that way and want to root for Lamar. And like I don't really have a rooting interest in this game in terms of who I want to win, but it wouldn't like it would be cool to see Lamar kind of get the monkey off his back. But just knowing what we know going into the game, I think I would trust Josh Allen to make the big plays.
I think in fairness, Lamar absolutely doesn't deserve that tag. I would say like this iteration of Lamar has really only been around for 2 years, last year and this year. And we saw him, we've seen him in 3 playoff games, 2 playoff games he eviscerated people, and then he lost to the Chiefs. And there's no getting around that loss to the Chiefs in the AFC Championship game was a rough loss and a rough performance for Lamar. But like to me, it's not worth talking about like a 2019 loss to the Titans with this iteration of Lamar, because he's like the last 2 years, he's like a totally different player.
Yeah. And he missed 2 years of playoffs before these last 2 years. So you're talking about stuff that's five or more years ago if you're not talking about those 3 games.
Right. And I know we're probably over time, but like I don't care because this is such an awesome game. To me, the thing that's most interesting, and I'm curious Cody's point of view in this game, is in general, like the Bills are at home. I would lean Allen in terms of like the quarterback that I trust, but it just seems like such a scheme and matchup advantage for the Ravens. And we saw that play out in the first round in terms of like their ability to run, Buffalo's ability to stop the run. And so like I'm really torn on who I think is going to win the game, just because I see the matchup advantage for the Ravens. I see like a lot of other things pointing in Buffalo's direction.
Yeah, like again, it's going to come down to how good Allen can throw the ball and the receivers of the receivers of the Bills. That's what it's going to come down to, because it's going to be hard to get run against the Ravens defense. We know that the Ravens offense is going to cause problems, but I think it's going to come down to the passing game of the Bills. If they can pass the ball, and they can, because they're going to have to pass to score, you run to win. And so if they can pass the ball adequately and take advantage of some of the problems that they have in the secondary, I think that loosens everything up. And then the offense is able to really hang with what the Ravens are going to be able to do.
let me ask you a question on this, Cody. Um, Derrick Henry had some long, not just like battering ram runs, but like long. He started off the game with a like 80-yard touchdown run in the first contest against the Bills. And there's been a lot going around about the Bills, like second level. Like once, if Derrick Henry busts past the line, they don't do very well at stopping the freight train. Do you see that as a big problem for the Bills in this game? And do you anticipate Derrick Henry gets a couple of like game-changing runs?
I do think that that's going to be an issue, and really we saw this in the Pittsburgh game. Pittsburgh tried to do a bunch of different things with scrape exchange, which is essentially just have the defensive end take Henry, linebackers kind of move around. They're kind of working out to put your athlete on an athlete. They have two very athletic linebackers, and so they trying to. And then obviously Taron Johnson is one of the best nickels in the NFL. So they have this hybrid kind of speed defense, right, where everybody's kind of light and everything, which that's fine against the Ravens. Ravens like a lot of 11 personnel. Their 12 personnel really isn't a true 12 personnel. But I do agree with you. If they run right at that defense, it's light in the interior. Where are the Ravens really good at? Interior offensive line. Where does Henry not mind running in the interior? So no, you're spot on. That's going to be a major concern for the Bills, is if he starts getting these 5, 6, 7-yard runs, do those eventually turn into 20, 30, 40-yard runs at the end of the game?
Yeah.
One advantage, I think it helps the Bills a lot that they played them earlier in the year. And they have an understanding of what the Ravens and this like Lamar Henry two-headed monster wants to do against them, and can game plan accordingly.
You've felt it. You've seen the speed. You've definitely. And like there's, I don't remember what the exact numbers are, but the Ravens basically never lose to any NFC teams. And like the reason people say for that is because if you haven't been on the field with it, you don't know what you're getting into. And so it does probably help the Bills that they played earlier in the year.
I will say I thought that same thing about the Steelers, and we picked the Steelers to cover 9.5. And the reasoning, yeah, I know, but the reasoning went like they just saw this a couple weeks ago, and the Ravens bludgeoned them, and surely they're going to adjust, and they couldn't adjust. Yeah. So
the Steelers just aren't near as good as the Ravens, though. And the Bills are and maybe their defense isn't any better than the Steelers was, but the Bills will go blow for blow and score on their side of the ball.
100%.
Well, that's what Cody, when you're saying like if they can pass the ball, like they're going to be able to pass the ball.
Well, and that's what I mean. Like, but consistently get some explosive plays, do that. I think they will be able to. I think this game's going to be close. But that's my thing is like that. If Allen comes out and he's killing it, they're able to get big chunks passing. It's going to be this is going to be a really difficult game for the Ravens to win.
I mean that Baltimore secondary is substantially worse than Denver's. Yes or no?
The Baltimore defense, yes, and
secondary,
yeah, and people will clamor on Denver had one of the easiest path to success with their schedule and things like that. I just feel it is what it is, but to me, I think the Ravens secondary is not as good as the Broncos secondary, and you're spot on.
Yeah, let's what do you say we make some picks? We'll go quick on this. I'm going to go first so I can show you guys the pacing on this. I'm going to go with we do a prop, an over-under, and a game pick each week, all three of us. I'm going to go with Jahmyr Gibbs over 82.5 rushing yards. Cody mentioned that Washington figured out the run defense a little bit in the last game against the Bucs. But I'm going to go with what we saw all year, which they were 28th in adjusted EPA per play against the run. Detroit's been able to run on everyone. Jahmyr Gibbs will get some explosives in this one. I'll go with Washington, Detroit over 55.5. It's a big number, but I think Detroit's going to score on anyone. And Jaden Daniels has enough, whatever it is, if they get down, the only way this game, or the most likely way this game goes under, is that Detroit blows them out and they score a ton of points, but Washington scores almost nothing. I think Jaden Daniels has enough moxie to at least try to keep it within 10 points. So I'll go with the over in that one. And then I will go Bills, Ravens. I'll go Bills +1. Just on the bat, I think it's going to be a really close game. I think Josh Allen makes one more play over the course of the game. That's the key moment in the game, and the Bills get the victory. So I'll go Buffalo +1. Scott?
We picked a lot of overs last week, and it didn't treat us that well.
Yeah, except the Texans-Chargers game.
I'm about to. Well, in which we picked the under.
Yeah, I know. That's what I'm saying.
I'm about to pick one more. We've already talked about it ad nauseum. I only feel that much better about it after this podcast. I like the Rams to cover 6 points against the Eagles. I like their quarterback and their coach better, which is I think all we need to say. Bills, Ravens, give me the over. Last I checked, it was like 50.5, maybe 51.5. Anyways, I don't think there's any way that there's not a lot of points in this game. 2 elite quarterbacks, 2 elite offenses, 2 defenses that leave a little bit to be desired. And then the last one is, we talked a little bit about the Chiefs-Texans. Have no idea what Jesse Minter was doing last week and letting Nico Collins kill them. I don't think Spags makes the same mistake. I think you got McDuffie spending a lot of time on Nico Collins with the safety over the top. Give me Nico Collins under 81.5 yards against the Chiefs.
All right.
Cody, go for it.
I think I'll go. My prop is Stafford under 225. I've got the over under. I think the Texans and the Chiefs is going to be under the 41.5. And then the game, I do have the Lions covering the 9.5. I think that they are at least a 10-point favorite for the Commanders.
That is an aggressive line in a playoff game to take a cover.
Yes, but I think if there's one team that can do, we talked about this. I don't see, if Sasha asked me,
they're not going to let off the gas either. That's the big thing. Like the Lions will keep scoring.
Especially they had a week off, man. They got to get some energy out.
Dude,
I can see the over at like I said, the Commanders will keep up in the sense that like they'll score enough to make it go over, but it could still be like 41-17.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. All right. Cody's got Stafford under, Houston, KC under, and Lions -9.5. Scott's got the Rams +6, the Bills, Ravens over 51.5, and the Nico under. I've got Jahmyr Gibbs over, Washington, Detroit over, and Buffalo +1. I'm fired up for this divisional round, fellas. Any last words for everyone before we get into it?
Should be a good one.
It's gonna be so good. How do you feel about a little Chiefs Lions teaser on Saturday? Just to wet the whistle.
Tease it up. Put it in the ice bath. That's going to do it for the matchup by Field Vision Sports. You can't stop a great conversation. We went a little over this week. Check us out on X at Field Vision MI, on Instagram, Field Vision Sports. Check out fieldvisionsports.com. Get in the app. Check out the matchups for this week. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.
I got nothing.